So many cars, yet so few plugs. Welcome to the Urban EV Podcast, where we speak to industry leaders and EV owners with boots on the ground to read the tea leaves on the direction of the green energy revolution. I'm your host, Rob Hoffman.
And I'm Scott Murphy.
On today's show, we're joined by Matt Teske. He's the founder of Chargeway, an innovative EV route planning app with simplification of the charging experience at its core. With a background in automotive marketing, branding, and communications, Matt is on a mission to make filling up your battery with electric fuel as easy to understand as well filling up your tank with gas. His goal is to help the EV curious confidently transition to electric mobility. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, thank you for having me.
So, Matt, let's just get right down to the beginning here, the nitty gritty. What inspired you to create Chargeway?
It was screwed up a road trip with my wife in our first electric car over a decade ago.
That's a real early
That'll do
adopter.
it.
Yeah, and it was again, my background's cars and automotive. I've been in the automotive industry for about 25 years now, and convinced my wife I wanted to get an EV. I was looking at it saying this is the future where things are going, and so convinced her, hey, let's get one. We got it, and went on a road trip. And I called the resort we were staying, asked them if they had charging. They said yes. And we showed up, and it turned out they had a 110 outlet on a wall. And it actually wasn't even a wall. It was on a wooden shed on the other side of a parking lot. And in that moment, they walked us over to it like, oh yeah, here's your charger. I was like, no, that's not a charger. And so I was, thoroughly embarrassed. And then that night at dinner, my wife and I were chatting, and we resolved things. We had a Chevrolet Volt, so we had gas as a backup. So that was at least okay. But I wanted to take advantage of charging. And at dinner the night, she said, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, sure. She goes, you're a car guy, right? Where's this? And she said, I'm not trying to be mean, but she's like, you couldn't do this. And you really, really wanted this car. So how on earth would I do this? How would anybody else do this that doesn't have your background? And I thought, that's a very, very good question. And the more I dug into it, soon after, I started just becoming a sponge wherever I could, not really about automotive, but about energy, and looking at like, how are we trying to explain this? And I quickly discovered the ways I got it wrong were because I went in with just my conditioning and assumptions of what I was told. And it turns out, no, there's a lot more to it. And you have to really want to learn it, or we have to make it easier.
So, Matt, let's just take one quick step back before founding Chargeway. As you mentioned, you are a car guy. So talk to us just a little more about your background that led you to where you are today.
Yeah, on the car side of it, like many young guys, I fell in love with cars as a kid. I still have Hot Wheels surrounding my desk right here. If I could turn my camera on and show everybody. But it really started that way. I mean, I fell in love with cars when I was young. Started first car I had in high school. I started building it, tuning it. I grew up in Southern California, and all my buddies had Hondas and Acuras, and I decided to buy a Chevy Cavalier because I didn't want to be like everyone else. And I was soon, explained like, hey, dude, this has a solid rear axle. It doesn't have an independent rear suspension. Like, this isn't great for road racing or any kind of like performance. I was like, yeah, but I want it to be me. So I built that car, but the building of it really was, it starts small. You do little stuff. You go to Pep Boys and, buy a license plate frame or something. But it really turned into going to events in Southern California. And what I quickly found out was that basically no one in my area was building those cars, but everybody around the country was. And the aftermarket companies that were building performance parts, whether it was lowering springs, air intakes, body kits, you name it, they all wanted to prototype onto a vehicle. And that's how I started getting into marketing and sponsorships in the automotive sectors. I was actually approached by a few companies saying, hey, we get calls about that car from people that live in Michigan, but we're in LA. So if we borrow your car and prototype something, we'll sponsor you. And I turned that into basically what I did. And it was a lot of fun. I networked like crazy in the industry, met a ton of people. General Motors ended up borrowing my car when I was in college and taking it on a national tour because they felt that my car represented the tuner industry better than what they had built. And so that's kind of how it started.
So that's incredible. So you truly have tuner cred. You are an ICE guy. You came from that world. So, is this heresy right now, that this sort of transition you've taken now into the EV space?
You could maybe call it that. It's funny, like a lot of the guys I grew up with in the industry, in the tuner world, as many refer to it. I out of college, I worked at Superstreet magazine, and Eurotuner magazine. Worked on things like the tour to the Nopi Nationals back in the day. So I know a ton of people in the space. And when I first got into EVs, a lot of them are kind of like, what are you doing? I went to the SEMA show for over 16 straight years, building cars with General Motors and Toyota, and that's what I did. And so so it's kind of like, what, man, did you hit your head? Like, what are you doing? And I just thought, no, this is where I think things are going. And partly too is I love cars, but another passion of mine is basically the natural world, and climate change is something that's very real for all of us. And so I had this conflict in my own world of I love cars, but I knew that the way we were going about it was damaging. The science is in on that. So I was like, okay, but can I keep my passion about cars while still having this passion for the environment? And so I thought, how could I blend that? And that's really the Chargeway wasn't the first thing I thought of. The first thing I did is I pretended Chevy made an electric sports car called the Jolt, and I made a website and a bunch of supporting social media content, and I shared it with some people that I had networked with in the EV industry, and they decided to just tweet about it when Twitter was normal, and and basically it went viral. And before I knew it, I all of a sudden had a lot of new contacts in the electric vehicle space, and it really allowed me to learn more, meet more people, but it was my way of kind of kicking the door in and saying, hey, this is what I think EVs can and should be. And I just was applying what I knew.
Awesome. So here you are. So clearly you've got the tuner cred and you've got some marketing background as well. So you saw an opportunity here with Chargeway. Why don't you kind of take us more of a deeper dive into the kind of the charging details, the typical journey that an EV owner takes and the challenge ahead and how you help, solve those issues?
That's a huge question. I mean, and really what we've discovered as it boils down to is really just meeting people where they are. And the vast majority of people, myself included, we all come from a conditioning of fuel is a liquid and it's on every street corner. It's highly visible, and you don't have to think to use it. You just swipe the card, grab the nozzle. You're off in 5 to 10 minutes, and the only thing you might shop around for is price, honestly. And so that's what people are accustomed to, and they just want to get on with their life. And with EVs, the beauty of an EV is once it's charged, I mean, it's just a car. In fact, it's a great car. It's got great performance. It's got a lot of torque. It has, like the software aspects to it are phenomenal. And the cool thing now is we have so many makes and models that are available. It's created a diversification around shopping, which is awesome. So we're kind of getting to a place where there's enough models that we have the ability for people to say, well, I might not be interested in that brand or style, but man, I've always loved that brand or style. And we have that now. So we've graduated into a main market vehicle catalog, which is great. But at the end of the day, people are still shopping like they always know, which is I like that car or I like that brand. And no one's actively thinking about how do I fill this thing up? And in America have been an extension of everybody's personality for a long time. And some people, it's kind of on the periphery. They don't really care. It's a utility thing. But for many people, it is, no, we're a Chevy family, or we're a Toyota family, or we're a Volkswagen family. And that's important. And dealers know that, and sort of consumers. So that's my view of it. Is with Chargeway, we said, okay, if that's how people think and shop, let's be thoughtful around the fact that we should start with, if you're choosing a vehicle, let's start there. And because what we recognized in all the research we did is the lack of universality around the fill up based on plug type, based on power the vehicle can accept, based on power output of the station, based on voltage of the battery pack. All these factors combined dictate what people want, which is, well, can I fill up there? And then how long do I got to wait? And that's really what we wanted to boil everything down to was, if you tell us what car you are buying, we can easily show you, yep, you can connect there. And here's how long you're going to wait. And the can you connect and how long you can wait is based on, we show you plug type and power on the map in a way that's simple. We use colors for plug type, numbers for power level. If you see a higher number, you can fill up faster. And that is what we wanted to achieve, was take all the engineering and distill it down into a visual system that allowed anybody to use it quickly. And that's really the jumping off point. But I can kind of pause there because there's other ways we can unpack that. But that's really what our goal was.
I believe you coined the phrase electric fuel. Is that your term, or did you pick that up from somewhere else?
I first used it about 8 years ago in a presentation, and the phrasing I used was electric fuel has arrived. And at the time, people from the industry were saying, what on earth do you mean? And I said, well, I'm thinking of it like a marketer. What is the product we're trying to get people to buy into? It's not cars. They already want to buy cars. We need them thinking actively about the fact that they have a fuel choice between gasoline and something else, and that's electric fuel. If we just simply call it electricity, they think of electricity in 1,000 other ways. We need to have them thinking about it's electric fuel, that they could be using for their car. And so, yeah, that phrase, I guess you could say I coined it, and it's found its way into other people's lingo, which I'm happy about because I think that's important that we frame it that way.
Yeah, and the way I view things is there's a marketing, there's a messaging issue right now, and that there's no doubt that this is one of the greatest challenges of the EV industry right now. Even earlier you had mentioned how your wife said, "Hey, you're a car guy. Why can't you figure this out?" Well, that was back in 2013. Well, fast forward to today, and even me, I was challenged with my first few attempts at charging my Kia right now in 2024, 2025. And my wife had the exact same question.
Yeah.
And I know for her anyway, she says, well, if you're going to struggle with this, there's no way on earth, if it was up to me to buy a car and I was making this decision on my own, that I'd ever choose an EV. It almost confirms what she suspected, that EVs are complicated.
Yeah.
And I think that technology obviously is going to continue to help make things easier, but I believe your mission is a really important one as well.
Well, I appreciate that. Again, as you described, even the conversations you've had with your wife, at the end of the day, people buy into products and services that make them feel happy and safe and confident. And that is a range of products. That could be a pair of Jordans that you want. It could be the fact that you like McDonald's, but it doesn't, those are things that bring joy, and consumer products and services. That's the end game is if you force people to overthink, then they're not going to gravitate to your product or your brand. And on top of that, if there's an incumbent product that they're very familiar with that they don't necessarily see a need to get rid of, that makes it even harder. And so I think that's probably the biggest challenge for the EV industry and just EVs in general is that the industry itself has really leveraged people that have been very thoughtful around the fact that we do have to resolve emissions and we do have to resolve, how we use products as it relates to transportation and energy. We do. And it's going to benefit all of us if we solve that. But how often the general public is actively thinking about that is not near as high as early adopters or innovators that were buying into EVs. Instead, we need to be thinking, how do we approach them for their lifestyle? And I think that's probably the biggest factor then too for buying an EV is, dealerships have never had to ask, where do you park your car at night? That would then dictate how they might talk to you about buying the car. They just go, here's a car, go fill it up, But now if you say to a dealership rep, oh, I park in a garage or driveway home every night. Why do you care? Well, that immediately changes the ownership experience discussion because then you can say, look, you're going to fill up exclusively at home aside from going on road trips. So the need of understanding around how the electric fuel experience works for a homeowner is genuinely different from an emotional and comfort perspective than it is from someone who says, yeah, I street park or I live in an apartment and I just grab an open spot. The way that those two types of lifestyles engage with EV ownership is very different. And we wanted the Chargeway mobile app to accommodate both. We wanted it to be something that if you were buying for the 99% use case of filling up at home, you have visibility into how your car works. You can connect it to Chargeway Plus and see your active state of charge and control your charging. But for that 1% use case of, I still need to go on road trips, you can plan a road trip and it does the thinking for you. And vice versa. If you're someone who's renting who can't charge at home, the station map is where you're going to live, but you're still going to want to go plan road trips. So we wanted an interface that was simplistic for how you can get into it, but do a lot of thinking on behalf of each type of owner so that when they engage with it, they can say, wow, this was thoughtful and it actually made it easy for me.
So let me ask you this, on the grassroots granular level, most consumers' first experience with an EV is either going to be at the dealership, just having to talk with the salesperson, or at the car rental counter as well.
Yeah.
This messaging being basically conveyed to the consumer at that level, is there anything that you can do or that Chargeway does that basically facilitates? Because everything you're saying here to me makes perfect sense, right? I think we're all preaching to the choir right now.
Mm.
But at the same time, the consumer needs to hear this as well. And I think there's certain touch points where it's really important to get this message across. Is Chargeway working with any manufacturers or car rental, agencies or companies that are basically at the forefront of this message?
So, I mean, you bring up a really good point is, who are the stakeholders at play that need to be cooperating, right? And one of the things I identified in that first presentation I gave, the electric fuel has arrived presentation, was really focusing on who are these stakeholders. And you've got policymakers, you've got automakers, you've got dealers, you've got utilities, and you've got charging networks. And all 5 of those major players, they sort of coalesce in some ways. And there are branches off of those, like, car rental companies, because they're not really selling the car, but they're giving you an automotive experience. So we've been working for the last 4 or 5 years with our software and market to deploy what we call the Chargeway beacon. It's basically a gigantic iPhone that we put into auto dealerships. And those programs have been in partnership with electric utility companies around the United States, because electric utilities, they're figuring out that they play a role in, oh, we are a fuel provider now. Oh, wow, we've never thought of ourselves that way. And the problem is fossil fuels, boy, are they good at marketing.
Yeah.
And it is,
We've been doing it for a while.
yeah, I've been doing it for a while, and it is everywhere. I mean, and it's Americana. I mean, you go to any car show, you'll see some guy with a T-shirt that has, like, Texaco on it or something with like an OG looking logo, and it's something that they need to contend with. But what we kept looking at was, okay, how and where do we engage this conversation with stakeholders that allows us to not only support that stakeholder, but in turn support the public and the buying public and the local community. And so that's where the Chargeway beacon comes into play, because it is a visual representation of everything we've been discussing, but in the showroom. So it can be a training tool for the dealerships and their sales teams. It never quits. It's on 24/7. It gets updated every day with new station info, new incentive info, new vehicle info. But
Is this
then
a kiosk? What
yeah,
exactly is this? What does this look like?
yeah, it is literally like, it's a 6-foot kiosk, and it's like a giant iPhone.
Hmm.
And what we felt was, this is my marketing hat, is you had to create a consistent experience through the entire sales experience. Because if you have this kind of bounce around way of understanding, well, my utility said to go here for this info, and it was a 2,000 word, dissertation around charging, and I didn't understand it. But then my auto dealership said, hey, here's a website we have from our OEM partner, and they've got a few videos, and it's a completely different location with a different way of explaining something. And they're bouncing around all these resources. You, as a consumer, you really want to navigate that to, like, buy that product. And so we said, well, let's not do it that way. Let's, again, change the conversation, communicate more simply with Chargeway's, color number system, but then translate that into software that can meet them through the funnel of the sales journey, which is online on a website, inside the showroom with a kiosk, and then inevitably in their pocket, and then inevitably in their vehicle down the line. So that's, so to the question of, like, who are we working with and how are we solving that? We've got a lot of dealerships we've worked with throughout the country, a lot of utilities we've worked with throughout the country, and we are now in discussion with car rental agencies, because, to your point, they thought of this as, we'll buy a bunch of EVs. They're going to save us money on maintenance, which is great. We love that. But so long as they hold their value, hey, we make money on resale. We'll just put them into our fleet and people will drive them. But they didn't think about the electric fuel experience.
Yeah.
They just handed keys to people and said, best of luck. And so
I've
Chargeway.
twice met. I've twice in the last 3 months met people attempting to charge in a stall next to me, confounded by the experience,
Yeah,
asking me questions, and it turns out we're renters,
yeah,
that had no idea. Grabbed the keys, drove out of the deal out of the car rental agency, and just kind of figured out, "Oh my god, I don't know how this works."
yeah.
Once again, a real negative experience.
Yeah, and that's what we want to avoid. I mean, again, it's cliche, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Yeah.
And if the rental experience is that first impression with an EV, I mean, we've been cataloging when we see content on social media about people who have rented EVs and who have said never again, absolutely no, and they list their reasons why. And we've contacted and spoken with a few of them, just, basically behind the scenes, saying, look, saw your post, would love to chat with you about your experience. And then in turn showed them Chargeway and said, out of curiosity, if you would have had this, if you'd have been told, hey, this Polestar you're driving, it goes to green stations. It's a level 7 vehicle, and there's a level 5 charger there and a level 7 charger there.
Yeah.
Which one's faster? They're like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. So that's the catch, is help. We're still, like, building the plane as we're flying it in some ways with this industry. And a lot of these stakeholders are having to reimagine who they are, especially automakers and stakeholders in the automotive industry. And that's a big part of what we're trying to help solve. So,
That's awesome.
I think one thing that struck me about what you guys were doing was this kind of productization and standardization,
mhm.
like the color coding and the numbers. I think talk a little bit more about that. It kind of felt a lot like octane and kind of that, when that all kind of got standardized, and ethanol, and like knowing what I need to put in my car. I think electric fuel kind of transcribes that into a language that people can understand. Talk to me a little bit more about like that standardization, and do you hope eventually to become an industry standard?
Oh, I mean, that was the goal originally. I mean, when I first did the presentation for Chargeway, there was no software platform. It was just a communication, discussion around this is what we should do, and here's how we can apply this to various stakeholders and even other apps, and here's what we could do. And I quickly realized that every stakeholder was saying, "Well, how do you make it work for us?" Whether that was a network or a utility or a dealer or what have you. So, but Scott, your question, it's based on exactly what you said. The research study that we did at auto shows for a year or two was basically a survey, and people at auto shows are there to talk cars and look at cars. And so we'd ask them, "Hey, what kind of car do you have?" And then whatever they said, Honda Accord, Subaru Outback, Toyota Tacoma. And the next question we'd ask is, when you go to the gas station, what gas do you buy? First word that comes to your mind, what would you even call it? And what we found was 71 or 2% of people said the word regular. Another 21 or so percent of the people said premium. And then there was a smattering of mid-grade and diesel. But over 90% of people could use one of two words, and that's how they knew how to fill up. Our follow-up question to them, Scott, was, what octane number is that? And it was comical how it just sort of like went, people are like,
Yeah, no idea.
99, I don't know. I mean, 64. And they just didn't know. And what we proved through that study was octane ratings. Again, it's a measure of, the octane and petane. It's all about engine knock. I mean, that's all what it's there for, right? But nobody cares. And what we found was
I have no idea what it means. Literally, I have no idea.
Yeah, every gas pump for the last 50 plus years literally could have been cherry, apple, banana instead of 87, 89, 91 in the States, and it would have had the same result. And so that's what we presented to a lot of the people that were inside of the EV industry that kept saying, no, people need to learn kilowatt. They have to learn amps and volts, and they have to. I said, they don't know anything about their gas car. And that's a magic liquid. Like they just go, I put this stuff in, the car goes vroom vroom. I love it. I'm going on a road trip. I mean, so the idea that they're going to be like, actually, my car is an 800 volt architecture battery pack. And this particular station, because that coupler is 250 amp.
That's just Rob. It's only Rob does that.
Right. Yeah, but it's like, but that's the thing is,
some people do.
The early adopters love the engineering. And I'm fascinated by it too. And I had to dive in and really understand it to make it so that we can have a different conversation. But that's the challenge is we've got a lot of people who have been in the space for a long time, who've been steering the narrative, who are brilliant engineers, very good policy people, advocates, and passionate. And these are people that help get the industry to where it is today. We just have to appreciate that in order to get the rest of the world to fall in love with what we're doing with the EVs, we have to speak their language. And that's, it's a very Steve Jobsian type way of thinking about it. It's just like, if Wozniak would have been like, Steve, let me make the presentation tomorrow back in like 1979, like we wouldn't have Apple. So did we want to make a standard? I mean, yeah, you could say that. I mean, when people first saw it, they said this would be great. But we realized quickly there's a lot of players at the table that kind of want to have it a certain way. And I had some great advice from someone at the time, this is now 7+ years ago, who said, this is a great idea. But do not try to get this implemented via the typical channels through government or something else, because it'll just get chopped apart by everybody that wants to kind of tweak it some way. Just as time progresses, let this naturally become what you will see in time. More people will probably say, that's actually a really smart way to do that, as opposed to let's just put a lightning bolt pin on a map and force people to like learn a bunch of stuff. And so we were very early in identifying what we knew was going to be a consumer psychology and consumer behavioral issue. But the cool thing is now we spent the last 5, 6, 7 years with our software and market, improving it, listening to both stakeholders and drivers, and improving where we could to make it really ready for the moment. So.
Awesome. And I definitely don't see this as being a problem that gets solved by the government. I can 100% see this being adopted by the auto manufacturers, the charging network owners. And I think it's massively needed. I mean, to Rob's point, he runs into people all the time who, what plug goes where, what card do I tap on what? And I think having this kind of ubiquitous standard across multiple networks and multiple auto manufacturers, if you're a dealer and you can say, listen, Rob, go to a green 7 and you'll be good all the time, that's magic. I mean, I spent most of my career in marketing. So when Rob was like, oh, there's a routing and something about electric fuel, I was like, no, the thing that resonated most with me, and it obviously is that, was the standardization. I was like, this is brilliant.
Thank you. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I do. It's got to be everything's got to be dumbed down, and obviously, Matt, you're extremely cognizant of that because the average consumer just doesn't want to think about it. There are some standards out right now, so I can tell you that most people understand level one, level two, level three. For them,
Mhm,
really understand level two and level three. No one knows what level one is. That's just plug it into your 110 outlet in the wall for 220 rather for level two, and
mhm.
DCFC direct charging fast for level three, but there are lots of different speeds. So yet again, it can be pretty confusing. How do you specifically break that down within your app?
Yeah, I mean, so you just did a great job of really framing like where the industry has gotten to for language. If there was a purist on this call right now or on the podcast right now, they would say, actually, there's no such thing as level three. It's DCFC. And if you want to talk about levels, there are levels 1 and 2 within AC and DC. I mean, that's what oftentimes happens when I have conversations with anybody that has, again, a really strong background in the data, is they will start really butchering why what we're doing is not correct. And so to your question about, what have we done? We said, well, level 1 and level 2 makes sense. If you're at a house, you have two options. Plug into the wall or upgrade and get something like a 220 at home. That's your level 2. So that's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. But it's
Mhm.
really where you get into the fast charging discussion and calling all fast charging level 3, and that that moniker is really kind of taken hold in the industry of like it's level 3 is just fast. But the problem is level 3 fast charging could be anything from 21-ish kilowatt all the way up to 400, which
Yeah.
means a level 3 charger could take anywhere from 3 or 4 hours to 15 minutes. And so why on earth would you call all of that the same thing? And then if the response is, well, no, no, it's just level 3, but then you got to learn the kilowatt. It's like, but why are we forcing people to do that? So we just said, let's just take level 3 and break it into multiple levels so that people can visualize it, number one, but then also those levels that we broke it into directly impact the way that people perceive time. So a level 3 charger might take, 3.5, 4 hours. A level 2 charger might take about 2 hours. A level 5 charger might take about an hour. A level 6 charger might take about a half an hour. A level 7 charger might take 15. So we looked at the engineering and said, how do we frame the engineering within this system so that people will appreciate what it means to their life as it relates to wait time?
So you've got this all dialed in right now. Talk to me more about the future. Where do you see the industry in 5 to 10 years, and where do you see your app as part of that picture?
Uh, wow. Well, if you'd have asked me that question 6 months ago, obviously it probably would have been, oh yeah, things are going to be just full steam ahead. You know, the truth is, so where do I see the industry? At the end of the day, electrification that ship has left the dock. Like that's
Mhm.
happening. The industry that will continue to, I think, push that forward is what's happening in China is really impressive, both from a vehicle perspective, software perspective, engineering perspective for both batteries and what's happening with charging. That is going to impact the global market because we have global players that manufacture vehicles here in North America. They have lost a foothold in many markets around the world. I don't foresee that they're going to just find themselves saying, "I guess we'll only sell cars between the Atlantic and Pacific." That would be kind of crazy. So the
Well,
industry's going to move.
just listening to what you're saying, totally agree. I think the biggest thing for me is like, do you see in that transition, where do you see yourself and where do you see the Chargeway app playing the biggest role?
So we've met with name and OEM, and we've met with them. When we met with them 5, 6 years ago, we were oftentimes it was almost like a pat on the head. Like, yeah, we were actually there's one OEM in particular that when we met with their team at the end of the call, one of the people from their team said, "Good luck with your little project." And that particular OEM has over time, it's become very clear that they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, we really need to solve this from a UI perspective with software. We need to make it easier." And so where do I see Chargeway going in that respect? Is the end of the day, we want to work with the OEMs wherever and however we can. We were very early in identifying a problem, but amidst identifying the problem, one thing we did focus on too is we did focus on protecting our idea. And so we do have patents for Chargeway in the US, China, India, and in Europe.
But
But
Matt, you can't do this all alone, right? I
right.
mean, you've gotta have a lot of other players involved in this as well, particularly the charger manufacturers, the charging plug standards as well. There's a lot of variables there, and your app needs to speak to all of them as well. So I imagine there's still some challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is that the industry is, and it's nascent. Like we're still very early in what's going to happen as it relates to where the landscape will look in 5 to 10 years and 20 years, obviously. But at the end of the day, everybody's trying to kind of get a foothold for how they represent that they've got the best solution. But in each of those instances, it's related to the silo they're in as a stakeholder, whether that's a network or an automaker, for example. And then within that, you have they want you coming to their solutions, and that doesn't solve anything for universality for understanding how to do this as a consumer. It means, no, we want you in our world. I mean, Tesla did it very well through their vertical integration. And what was interesting is, again, they approached it very differently from how they looked at the touch points that a driver would have that was different from the auto sector and what they'd known forever. When Mary Barra was first asked when the Bolt was announced, what are you going to do for infrastructure? She said, we don't do that. Now, that was 8 years ago, and clearly GM has evolved their position over time, but that was because they just didn't know what they didn't know. They were approaching it from the automotive lens, which is we don't solve infrastructure or energy. We build cars. These happen to run on electricity. So we made one. People get to buy it and use it. And so,
and Mary Barra, by the way, is the CEO of GM for all those at home that
for those who don't know. Yeah. No, and that's the thing is that this evolution has been happening in real time. And one of the things that we have now is we've got this really huge marketplace of both vehicles and infrastructure. And amidst that, and I had a back and forth with someone the other day on social media about this, where they said, this will be solved, and everybody went to the Tesla connector. It's fine. I said, okay, yes, it's an elegant design, and I'm glad that that's what everybody decided to do. However, there's all of these things that happen behind the curtain that dictate if you can, in fact, use a charger, whether that's the battery, the voltage, the amperage, you name it, all those different, the software. And so what we're contending with is that it's very complicated, and the complication is compounding. It on the surface, it sounds like we've simplified. We're all going to use the Tesla connector. We're going to call it NACS and North American Charging Standard, and we're good. But we have millions of vehicles in market that have 4 different physical plug types on them, depending on which car you're looking at. We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, technically, of physical chargers with 4 different plug types on them, depending on which one you're looking at. And also different power levels for how they function with each vehicle. So that's not going to be magically solved just because we switched to NACS. We have all this legacy hardware and product in market that is going to hit the used market in 5-10 years, maybe longer. So somebody who's buying a used EV that was manufactured in 2025, 10 years from now, it's still going to be a functional car. It's the software hopefully can be updated, but depending on what they bought, it might have a CCS connector. It might have a NACS connector. They're still selling the Nissan Leaf with CHAdeMO right now. So again, that's to me, that's the importance of just understanding the true complexity of what we're facing. And that's what we wanted to look at and say, if that's the Wild West chaos that the public has to navigate, can we solve that? And I think we've done a great job with that. But to your questions about where's the stakeholder alignment, who are we working alongside? We continue to get more natural inquiries from stakeholders who have felt the pain finally, who are saying, yeah, we got this wrong. Can you help us? And that's why we're here. And so we want to have those relationships. But moreover, the reason why we ended up going about, filing patents was because another friend of mine who worked at an OEM was one of the first people I showed Chargeway to. And I showed them the idea, and they said, phenomenal. Everyone's going to want this. Now, this is like 7-8 years ago. The next words out of their mouth were, go home and get a lawyer. Because if you don't protect this somehow, anybody and everybody's going to walk around and try to find a way to basically say, oh, neat idea. And so we didn't protect it because it's like, we want it to be ours. Frankly, the protection was around the fact that we did meet with a lot of people about 7 years ago, and a lot of them did the whole pat on the head thing. But then they all started kind of slowly working toward what we were focused on, which is you do have to simplify. You do have to do the thinking for people in software. And so, I mean, I don't know, call it capitalism, I guess. But at the end of the day, our app is free to use for any driver out there.
I also think that it doesn't help if you have every different OEM and manufacturer creating their own standard.
Yeah.
Again, when I sit back and look at your business, marketer hat on, I think go and license this to all the OEMs. Then all of the charging network providers will follow suit because they want everyone who owns this. Rob can go to a Red 7. He now knows Red 7. If Charge America doesn't label their charger Red 7 with a licensing agreement from you, he's just not going to go there because he assumes he can't charge there. So I definitely see you guys, you could easily become an industry standard from the outside. And I think that's a huge benefit of keeping it away from the government for many reasons, obviously right now. But no, I mean, how do you feel about something like that, licensing to OEMs? Is that a direction you guys have considered?
We designed Chargeway to solve a problem for everybody, and that was both industry and the public. That is why I did it. I wanted to help accelerate EV adoption as fast as I could, and I applied my experience to what I felt was a big problem. So I would love to license Chargeway to every OEM and say, look, just you have data. You guys have the same data we do for that matter sometimes, but the way you're translating that to your customers is not functionally useful to a dealership to explain it. And if anything, they're still having to figure it out inside the car. And it's not really helping anybody because you're trying to figure out your own weird way of saying, well, this is this type of charger and this is that type of charger. So if I would love to have that happen, Scott. I mean, that's really what the initial intent was with Chargeway. But at the time, we just got so much feedback, which was, we don't think this is a problem. I was like, but it is. And then over time, it turned into, well, it's not our problem to solve. And then it's like, well, okay, but who's going to solve it?
But it really is, because that's what's holding back EV adoption is the bad press that everyone's getting. And I think a lot of the manufacturers are coming around, and Iona, led by BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Hyundai, Kia, and a host of other manufacturers as well. They finally are getting the joke that just like Tesla, you need to build a charging network that you can rely on. And that's what's going to get people to buy cars. It's understanding the process. Hello, Chargeway. This is also a big part of the equation. It's actually having the chargers, having them accessible, having them reliable, and having a means to communicate with you and your car of how to get there and when you need to arrive. I think once those are all those issues are resolved, I think that's when you're going to start seeing mass adoption.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head, and I think, and I'll be, it's an unpopular thing to say, but the more that we keep, forcing people that are new to this to feel like they have to become electrical engineers, the more intimidated people get, and it doesn't create, a positive response. We could compare it to other apps out there like, PlugShare and others of like, how you different? It's like, I'll do the Coke Pepsi challenge on that any day of the week. Because if you put if you say add your car to both these platforms and you do a side by side of a major metro area, well, if you glance at Chargeway, you can go, okay, color, I know I can go, and power is obvious, which dictates my wait time. Awesome. And you look at the other map and you go, okay, so they're all the same. It's just no, you got to go in and filter and figure out. It's like, and that immediately is where you lose people. So,
all right, so Matt, I'm going to give you an opportunity right here to hop on a soapbox. And I'd love for you there are listeners out there that are what I call the EV curious, and they're listening to our podcast. This is your opportunity to give them the pep talk to those that are hesitant about charging. And what's your advice to them about making the leap?
Well, I think the first thing, again, we talked about earlier is, where do you park your car at night? That's gonna dictate your comfort level for how you can go into the experience. But either way, is trusting two things. One is that electricity is everywhere. I mean, that's the fun part, is you can tap into it anywhere and everywhere. And so whether you're a homeowner or not. And so electric fuel awaits you virtually wherever you go. That could be a city, or that could be a remote area, like, somewhere where you go camping and they have a lodge that happens to have a light bulb. That means they have electric fuel. So just the visualization of the fact that this fuel is everywhere. And so, and the defense of the public is, their response is, I don't see any advertising for it. I'm like, I know, you're right. And all we're trying to do is create that visibility for you in a way that's easy for you to use. And it meets you where you are, which is, instead of saying, here's a bunch of stuff figured out. Again, if you're someone who's car shopping, download Chargeway. It's free to download. And if you're looking at different EVs, or if you're just even curious, is say, okay, I'm going to add these 3 EVs to my Chargeway account, and I'm going to plan road trips with all 3. And I'm going to see where it's going to tell me I got to stop. And I'm going to do it in 30-degree weather. I'm going to do it in 90-degree weather. And let's see what happens. It's going to do all of that thinking for you. And what you're going to discover is, there's no signage out there. There's no billboards. There's no Super Bowl ads for electric fuel. But wow, yeah, it is everywhere. And it doesn't take me days to fill up. It takes me 15, 20 minutes at a level 7 charger. That I did not know, but you'll see that in Chargeway. And that's what I would invite you to understand is that you don't need to be scared of the idea of it. Range anxiety, as it's been said for a long time, is not actually about the car. It's about trust in fuel that can keep your car going. And that's what we wanted to address with Chargeway. And once you have a Sesame Street type experience with it, which is, I go to the Kermit stations and the count tells me how fast they go. It really takes away a lot of that intimidation. So
wonderful, wonderful. All right, Matt. I think you've really painted an amazing picture there, and hopefully, you've inspired some people to really understand that their fears and their concerns are being addressed right now, and will continue to do so over time. This book is still being written right now, but I love what you're doing over here with Chargeway. Can you share with the audience the best way to connect with you, or where to find Chargeway?
yeah, I mean, we're just chargeway.net is our website. You can go to the website. You can reach out to us through there. It's got all the information about the mobile app on the website. Also has information about what we're doing with auto dealers and electric utilities and kind of see how we, glue everything together through what we do. And then on social media, it's just at Chargeway at every social media channel. So that's Facebook, that's Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. That's LinkedIn, that's Instagram. And reach out to us. And also if you download the Chargeway mobile app, there's a contact button right in your screen where you can just tap contact us and shoot us a note. And if you have any questions as you're using the app, feel free to do so. But I do invite everybody, if you're listening and you're EV curious, and again, Rob, the work that you're doing as someone who has, again, you're on the front lines of I'm also figuring it out. The message is important around the fact that this is for everybody. It really is. Electric cars are just cars. You just got to know how to use electric fuel. And so I do invite everybody to just give the Chargeway app a download and just see for yourself. It'll probably surprise you how much is out there, but knowing that you can navigate easily, that's what I hope you get out of using the app. And for those who are EV drivers who do listen to this too, I also invite you to give it a shot. You may have been using something else because that's what you knew, but I think you'll really enjoy using Chargeway too.
Yeah, and I've used Chargeway, and I strongly recommend everyone at home listening who is driving an EV to give it a shot. It's a very strong competitor to to some of the other options that are out there right now. Um, Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you,
Yeah.
Scott. Thank you, listeners at home. A reminder to everyone to follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we live. Like, subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Your review or feedback is always appreciated. Any subject you'd like us to cover, just leave us a comment. See you next week with a new episode of the Urban EV Podcast.